The conference room on the 47th floor of Sterling Enterprises erupted into chaos at 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon in late
The
September.
projections are in. We need to align
Emma
on this
Sterling,
strategy.
7 years
As you can
old,
see, the
and
growth
dressed in a
trajectory
navy
supports
pinafore that cost more than most
Please, you
families
need to
spend
leave
on
now.
groceries
It's
in a
not
month,
safe here.
hurled a laptop across the polished mahogany table. The device cartwheeled through the air, scattering quarterly reports and psychological assessments like shrapnel before slamming into the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked Midtown Manhattan. The glass held. The child psychologist, Dr. Jennifer Hayes, credentials from Johns Hopkins, 15 years specializing in pediatric trauma, did not. The woman backed toward the door, clutching her leather briefcase against her chest like a shield. Emma's small face twisted with fury that seemed too large for her frame, too ancient for her age. The words tore out of her throat, raw and accusing. "You don't understand anything!" Dr. Hayes fumbled for the door handle. Her expensive silk blouse had a coffee stain on the collar from when Emma had knocked the cup over 20 minutes into their session. The 7th specialist in 3 months. The fastest to flee. Catherine Sterling stood motionless by the window, her Armani suit a study in architectural precision, every seam sharp enough to draw blood. Only her eyes betrayed her, exhausted, desperate, failing. The September sun caught the skyline beyond the glass, painting steel towers in amber light that did nothing to warm the space between mother and daughter. When Dr. Hayes escaped into the hallway, Catherine whispered to the empty air, "Can no one handle this child?" The question hung unanswered in a room designed for billion-dollar decisions, now littered with the wreckage of one 7-year-old's grief. 3 months, 7 specialists, 0 progress. Catherine's reflection in the window showed a woman who could navigate hostile takeovers and board revolts with surgical precision, yet stood paralyzed before her own daughter's pain. 43 floors below, in the janitor's break room tucked between the loading docks and the building's mechanical heart, Michael Brooks cradled his daughter against his chest. Grace, 7 years old with honey-brown hair that caught light like her mother's once had, pressed her ear against his sternum as he hummed a lullaby his late wife used to sing. The melody drifted through the ventilation system, soft and warm as candlelight against the building's steel bones. His voice carried up through ductwork and concrete, riding currents of recycled air through spaces the architects never intended for human warmth. Upstairs, in that devastated conference room, Emma Sterling's head lifted. Her tears stopped mid-track down her cheeks. For the first time in the 93 days since her father's plane went down over the Atlantic, something reached through the wall she'd built around her heart. Michael Brooks's mornings began in a cramped apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens, where the radiator clanged like a prisoner beating bars, and the neighbors argued through walls so thin he knew their grievances better than his own. The alarm pulled him from dreams at 5:30, dreams where Sarah still sang and Grace still had a mother, and his hands created music instead of pushing mops across marble that cost more per square foot than he made in a month. He brewed coffee in a pot older than his daughter, the cheap grounds bitter on his tongue, and stood at the kitchen window watching the city wake. The skyline rose across the river, distant and glittering, a world apart from this 4th-floor walk-up where the stairs groaned and the electricity hummed a constant note of barely adequate. His hands, scarred from years of equipment handling, calloused from mop handles and cleaning solutions, moved with surprising gentleness as he braided Grace's hair. She chattered about her drawings, her friends, her latest obsession with monarch butterflies and their 3,000-mile migration. He listened like she was reciting poetry, because 7-year-olds who'd never known their mothers deserved fathers who heard every word. The photograph on the refrigerator caught morning light. Michael at 27, younger and unbroken, standing behind a mixing board in a studio where Grammy-nominated albums were born. Gold records framed the background. Artists whose names still topped charts leaned over his shoulder, trusting his ear to shape their sound into something platinum. That man was gone. The life he'd built, sound engineer, artist, collaborator, the pulse of creation in his fingertips, had died the same day Sarah hemorrhaged on a delivery table, choosing their daughter over her own breath. Michael had held his wife's hand as the machines beeped their final symphony. When Grace was placed in his arms, still covered in vernix and possibility, still gasping her first breaths while Sarah took her last, he knew his old life was over. Now he pushed a mop cart through the marble halls of Sterling Enterprises, invisible to the executives who rushed past in $1,000 shoes. He didn't mind invisibility. It had advantages. He could observe without being observed, could listen to the rhythm of this strange world where money moved like water, and people treated each other like chess pieces to be sacrificed for advantage. They rode the N train together, Grace's small hand in his, her backpack decorated with butterfly stickers bumping against his hip. He dropped her at PS 145 Queens, 3 blocks from the building where he worked, and watched her disappear through doors painted institutional green. Then he walked to Sterling Enterprises and descended to the basement where the facilities staff gathered, where men and women in matching uniforms maintained the infrastructure that kept the empire running. The other janitors nodded as he clocked in. Marco, who'd worked the building for 20 years. Margaret, who sent money home to Jamaica and kept photographs of grandchildren she saw once a year taped inside her locker. They existed in the spaces between, cleaning boardrooms after midnight, emptying trash bins full of discarded ambitions and half-eaten lunches that cost more than their hourly wage. Michael didn't judge. Judgment required energy he saved for Grace. But sometimes, late in the evening when most staff had gone home and he mopped the executive floors alone, he heard piano music drifting down from somewhere above. Hesitant notes, repeated scales, the sound of someone learning. He'd pause, mop in hand, and close his eyes. Music had been his language once. Now it was just an echo of who he used to be. Catherine Sterling's mornings began in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, where silence was purchased by the square foot and maintained by staff who knew better than to speak unless spoken to. She woke at 5 without an alarm, her body conditioned by years of discipline to function on minimal sleep. 4 miles on a treadmill that cost more than most cars, her reflection multiplied in floor-to-ceiling mirrors that showed a woman who'd weaponized her own biology. Excellent bone structure from her mother's side, disciplined eating, strategic investments in skincare and dermatology. 33 years old, but could pass for 26. Beautiful, successful, absolutely alone. The rainfall shower in her bathroom never quite washed away the exhaustion that lived beneath her skin. By 7, she sat in her office reviewing reports that judged the fates of thousands of employees she'd never meet. She signed contracts that moved millions, fired executives who failed to meet targets, approved mergers that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Her assistant brought meals she barely touched. Her phone buzzed with messages she answered in clipped sentences that brooked no argument. She was brilliant, ruthless, capable of building revenue by 28% in 2 years while competitors floundered, and utterly incapable of reaching the daughter who lived 3 floors above her office in a private suite designed by child psychologists who'd never met a problem they couldn't solve until they met Emma Sterling. Emily had been Emma once, bright-eyed, curious about everything, the kind of child who asked why clouds floated and whether birds dreamed. That child had vanished the morning Catherine's phone rang with news that Robert's private jet had experienced catastrophic mechanical failure over the Atlantic. No survivors, no remains recovered. Just wreckage scattered across cold water, and a 4-year-old girl who'd watched her mother answer that call, watched her mother's face go white as winter, watched her father leave for London and never return. Emma had stopped speaking after the crash, stopped smiling, stopped trusting that the world was anything but a place where people you loved vanished into smoke and salt water. Catherine had hired the best trauma specialists money could reach, therapists trained in Switzerland, nannies with credentials that read like doctoral dissertations, child psychologists from Johns Hopkins, Yale, the Tavistock Clinic in London. Emma had outlasted them all. She threw tantrums that left rooms destroyed, locked herself in closets for hours, stared at adults with eyes that saw through their practiced compassion to the fear underneath, the fear that this child was broken beyond fixing. The latest specialist had lasted exactly 47 minutes before fleeing. The two worlds existed in the same building, but might as well have been on different planets. Michael mopped the lower floors where paralegals worked late and interns fetched coffee for partners who'd forgotten their names. He emptied trash bins full of discarded dreams, rejected proposals, printed emails announcing layoffs, half-eaten lunches from restaurants he couldn't afford. The waste spoke volumes about the people who generated it, their casual relationship with excess. Catherine, meanwhile, watched her employees through security monitors, a habit born from corporate paranoia and personal loneliness. The cameras covered every floor, every corridor, blind spots eliminated by consultants who charged 6 figures for security audits. One evening, while reviewing footage, ostensibly checking protocols, actually avoiding the empty penthouse where Emma refused to eat dinner, she saw him, the janitor with the kind face, kneeling beside his daughter in the lobby, helping her tie her shoe. The little girl laughed at something he said, threw her arms around his neck with unself-conscious joy. Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the ice she'd built around herself since Robert died. It had been so long since Emma had laughed like that, so long since Catherine had felt anything but the dull ache of inadequacy. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but she watched him walk away hand in hand with his daughter and felt the weight of everything she'd lost pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. The afternoon it happened, Emma had been particularly difficult. She'd refused her tutoring session with the Mandarin instructor, thrown her lunch, organic quinoa and grilled salmon prepared by a private chef, against the wall of her suite, leaving an orange stain on wallpaper that cost $200 per roll. Screamed at the nanny until the woman quit on the spot, the 5th in as many weeks to surrender. Catherine had been in Tokyo on a video call, 3 a.m. there, 2 p.m. here, negotiating terms of a merger that would reshape their Asian market presence. The call was delicate. Millions rode on her ability to read subtext in translated phrases, to navigate cultural nuances while projecting strength. She was winning. Then security's voice crackled through her earpiece, private channel, urgent tone. "Miss Sterling, we have a situation. Your daughter is missing from her suite." Catherine's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. She muted the call, ignoring the confused expressions of the executives on screen. "What do you mean, missing?" The nanny stepped out after the incident. When she returned, Emma was gone. "We're searching now." 40 minutes. That's how long it took them to find her. 40 minutes during which Catherine abandoned the Tokyo merger and tore through the building on foot, taking stairs instead of waiting for elevators, her heart a drum against her ribs. 40 minutes imagining every nightmare scenario. Emma on the street, Emma hurt, Emma gone the way Robert was gone, vanished into a world that took people without warning or mercy.
They found her on the 12th floor, in the janitor's break room that wasn't supposed to be accessible to anyone outside facility staff. Security protocols, badge access, all the expensive systems Catherine had installed to keep her daughter safe, rendered useless by a 7-year-old who'd observed patterns and exploited blind spots with the strategic thinking she'd inherited from both parents. Emma had known the shift change happened at 6:15,
had watched custodial staff enough to memorize the service elevator code, 9472. Had chosen the 12th floor because the security camera outside the break room had been broken for 2 weeks, a maintenance backlog issue that now felt like criminal negligence. She'd slipped through the gaps in their expensive net with the ease of water finding cracks. Michael had been organizing cleaning supplies when the door burst open. A small tornado in a designer dress rushed in, wild-eyed and feral, grabbing his mop like a sword. His first instinct was alarm. This wasn't his daughter. Who was this child? Where were her parents? But then he saw the look in her eyes. Not fear. Curiosity. The same expression Grace got when she discovered something new. He didn't raise his voice or reach for her or do any of the things adults typically did that made children feel cornered. He just asked a question, his tone conversational, like they were equals. "You want to help me clean?" The girl stopped mid-swing, stared at him with enormous eyes, brown like autumn leaves, assessing. He pulled out a spray bottle and a rag, moving slowly so as not to startle her. This is the secret technique. You spray 3 times, no more, no less. Then you wipe in circles, counterclockwise. Very important, the direction. Clockwise doesn't work. He demonstrated, making it look like magic instead of menial labor. The girl took the rag, sprayed exactly 3 times, the sound sharp in the quiet room, wiped in careful circles, her movements deliberate. For the first time in months, though Michael didn't know this yet, she was following directions, not because she was forced to, but because someone had made it sound like an adventure rather than a chore. Michael heated water in the break room microwave, mixed in cocoa powder and a splash of vanilla extract the way Sarah used to make it. Muscle memory, following a recipe his hands knew better than his head. He handed the mug to the girl, who wrapped small fingers around it like it was treasure. Then he did what he did best with Grace. He talked. Not at her, not down to her, just talked. About his daughter, their morning routine, the book about monarch butterflies they were reading together. How the butterflies flew 3,000 miles, guided by instincts they didn't understand, but trusted anyway. The girl listened, perched on a folding chair, her legs swinging, a tiny smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When Catherine found them 20 minutes later, she was prepared to unleash fury. She'd run from the elevator, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, her breath short from stares and fear. But when she burst through the break room door, the words died in her throat. Emma was leaning against the janitor's shoulder, holding a mug of cocoa, telling him about the piano piece she'd been practicing. Her voice was soft but clear, her expression peaceful in a way Catherine hadn't seen since before the crash. The janitor looked up, saw the CEO, and understood immediately. His expression shifted, not fear, not deference, just recognition of the moment's fragility. He gently shifted Emma upright, his voice kind. "Someone's here to take you home." Emma's face closed like a door slamming shut. Catherine felt the familiar knife of failure twist in her gut. But something had changed. Emma looked back at the janitor as Catherine led her away, and that look said everything. She'd found something in that break room that all the money and expertise in the world hadn't provided. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., she sat in her office and pulled up the security footage from the break room, watched the entire encounter frame by frame.
watched this stranger, this janitor whose name she didn't even know, treat her daughter like a person rather than a problem. Watched Emma respond with trust instead of terror, and Catherine, who hadn't cried since Robert's funeral, who prided herself on emotional control that could freeze nitrogen, sat alone in her glass tower and wept. The next day she did something unprecedented. She went to the basement level where the facilities staff gathered, a place she'd never visited in 8 years of running this company. Found him refilling his cleaning cart, looking tired but content. When she spoke, her voice came out harsher than intended, the CEO tone she couldn't quite turn off even when she wanted to. "I need to speak with you." He followed her to a small conference room, standing rather than sitting, maintaining the invisible line between employer and employee. Catherine got straight to the point because that's what she did, had always done, the only way she knew how to operate. "My daughter only talks to you. I don't understand why, but I'm offering you a temporary position. Help her communicate. Spend time with her. Just be whatever it is you were yesterday. I'll triple your current salary." Michael was quiet for a long moment. She watched calculations run behind his eyes. Not greed, something more complex. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "With respect, ma'am, you can't buy what your daughter needs." Catherine's jaw tightened. The refusal stung more than it should have. Rejection in a form she wasn't accustomed to receiving. She tried again, the only tool she had. "Name your price." "There is no price." He said it simply, without judgment but without surrender. "But if you're asking me to spend time with your daughter, I'll do it. Not for money. Because no child should feel as alone as she clearly does." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Not cruel. He wasn't being cruel. Just honest. Honest in a way people hadn't been with her in years, maybe ever. Everyone wanted something from her. Money, influence, access. This man in a janitor's uniform was refusing what she offered and offering what she couldn't buy. She tried to regain control, to put this on terms she understood. "Then I'll create a formal position, benefits, a contract." He cut her off, polite but firm. "If this is about paperwork and liability, I'm not interested. Either you trust me or you don't." Standoff. Catherine, unused to anyone refusing her authority, her ability to shape the world through sheer force of will and capital. But he was right. This wasn't something she could contract. It required trust, the one currency she'd spent down to nothing since Robert died. Finally, she nodded. "After your shift ends. 1 hour daily. If Emma's uncomfortable, the arrangement stops." The arrangement caused immediate uproar. Senior executives whispered in elevators, their voices carrying that particular frequency of workplace gossip. HR submitted concerned memos about protocols and liability. Margaret Foster, the HR director, brought a stack of forms that needed signing. Background checks, insurance waivers, documentation to protect the company from lawsuits that might arise from allowing non-qualified personnel access to the CEO's minor child. Richard Harrison, senior vice president and heir apparent, who'd been passed over when the board chose Catherine after Robert's death, made his position clear in a meeting with the CFO. 58 years old, silver-haired, with a kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "She's losing it, David. First the Tokyo delay because she had to handle a family emergency, and now she's hiring the janitor to play therapist? The woman's grief is compromising her judgment." David Mitchell, CFO and Catherine's ally for the past 6 years, shifted uncomfortably. "She's still delivering results. Revenue's up. For now."
but board members are asking questions. How long before this affects the bottom line? Richard planted seeds carefully, positioning himself as concerned colleague rather than opportunist. But Michael, mopping the floor outside that conference room, heard every word through the door they'd left ajar, heard himself reduced to the janitor, his daughter invisible, his life a weapon being sharpened against the woman who'd asked him for help. Catherine overrode them all with the blunt instrument of her authority. She didn't explain or justify, just declared the arrangement approved and dared anyone to challenge her. They didn't, but the whispers continued, spreading through the building like mold in darkness. Michael started coming to Emma's suite after his shift ended. No structured lessons, no therapy techniques from manuals written by people who'd never known real loss. He taught her to water the plants on the terrace, explaining how roots needed both water and air to breathe. Too much of either, and they'd drown. He showed her how to organize her books by color, chaos into rainbow order, the satisfaction of visible progress. He brought his guitar. Hadn't played it in 7 years, the case gathering dust in his apartment closet because music reminded him too much of Sarah and studio sessions where they'd fallen in love between takes. But for Emma, he made an exception, taught her simple chords, her small fingers struggling to press the strings, his larger hands guiding hers until she found the notes. And he listened. When Emma talked about her father, haltingly at first, then in rushing sentences, Michael didn't offer platitudes about heaven or time healing wounds. He just nodded, understanding in his silence. Missing someone never really stops, but it can become softer, like a stone in your pocket. You always know it's there, but it doesn't cut anymore. Emma understood that in a way the therapist's careful explanations had never reached. The grief didn't go away. She just learned to carry it differently. One afternoon, Catherine came to collect Emma for dinner and found her daughter asleep on the couch, her head resting on Michael's shoulder. He'd been reading to her from a book about constellations, how ancient peoples had connected dots in the sky to make meaning from chaos. His finger was marking the place on the page, his other arm loose around Emma's shoulders. He looked up when Catherine entered, put his finger to his lips, the universal gesture for silence. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway. Her daughter hadn't slept peacefully in 3 months, had fought bedtime like it was an enemy, woken screaming from nightmares about planes falling from the sky. Now she slept like childhood should allow, peaceful, safe, trusting that the world would be there when she woke. Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. Not attraction, not yet. Something more fundamental. Recognition. This man had given her daughter something she'd been desperately searching for, the simple gift of being understood. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Catherine sat in her office and pulled up Michael's employee file. The screen glowed in the dark office, numbers and dates telling a story in fragments. High school diploma, no college. Previous employment, senior sound engineer, Diamond Sound Studios. Left 7 years ago. Reason for leaving, family circumstances. She saw the gaps in his resume, the obvious step down from engineer to janitor. Googled his name out of curiosity that felt like violation, but that she couldn't resist. Found articles from 8 years ago. Rising star Michael Brooks, the sound genius behind the Platinum Records. A photograph of him at 27, standing behind a mixing board with Grammy-nominated artists. Awards in the background. Interview clips where he talked about music like other men talked about God. Then nothing. A cliff edge where his career fell into silence. She pieced it together. He'd left at the height of his success, right when his wife would have been pregnant or sick. Had sacrificed everything, fame, money, the work he clearly loved, for family, for love, for responsibility. Catherine compared it to her own choices. She'd built an empire, lost her daughter in the process. The contrast was painful enough to make her close the laptop and pour herself a drink she didn't finish. The whispers started small, but grew like mold in darkness. The CEO was spending too much time on the 12th floor. The janitor was always in her daughter's suite. People invented explanations that fit their understanding of the world. He must be after her money. She must be having some kind of breakdown, reaching for comfort in inappropriate places. The gossip spread through break rooms and happy hours, gaining detail and venom with each retelling. It reached the board of directors within a week. 3 of them requested an emergency meeting, men in their 60s who'd known Robert, who'd voted Catherine into the CEO position because she'd proven herself more ruthless than any of them. They sat across from her in the boardroom, concern written on faces that had never shown her concern before. "This looks inappropriate, Catherine. Your judgment may be compromised." Catherine's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "My judgment built this company's revenue by 28% in 2 years. When your judgment accomplishes the same, we'll discuss appropriateness." But the pressure mounted. Shareholders called with carefully phrased concerns. PR prepared crisis management strategies for scandals that hadn't happened yet, but that they could imagine with the precision of professional pessimists. Photographers from tabloids started lurking outside the building, hoping to catch something scandalous to sell to readers hungry for stories about the wealthy falling. Michael heard about it from other employees, saw the looks he was getting from security, from colleagues who'd been friendly before and now avoided eye contact. One evening he didn't show up to Emma's suite, or the next. By the 3rd day, Emma had stopped speaking again, the progress vanishing like it had never existed. Catherine found him in the parking garage about to leave, his old Honda Civic parked in the employees section far from the executive spaces where her Mercedes waited. She didn't care who saw, didn't care about protocols or appearances or what the board would say. She just walked up to him and spoke the truth. "You're leaving because of the rumors." "I'm leaving because staying hurts your reputation. And maybe your daughter deserves better than a father figure who causes her mother problems." Catherine stepped closer. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sounds of the city muffled by concrete. "You did what dozens of trained professionals couldn't do. You reached my daughter. Don't you dare walk away because some bitter people can't understand that." Her voice cracked on the last word. Michael looked at her and saw past the designer clothes and the authority to the desperate mother underneath, the woman who'd built walls so high she'd trapped herself inside them. "Please. She needs you." The last 2 words cost her everything. Catherine Sterling, who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, was begging a janitor not to leave. Michael studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. I'll stay." The night the storm hit, Emma was already on edge. The weather forecast had predicted severe thunderstorms, high winds, possible flooding. Everyone who worked with Emma knew what that meant. Her father's plane had gone down in a storm. Every crack of thunder was a trigger. Every flash of lightning a traumatic reminder. Catherine canceled her evening meetings and stayed in the penthouse with Emma, watching her daughter curl into herself as the sky darkened. The first thunderclap sent Emma into a full panic attack, her small body rigid with terror, hands clawing at her own arms like she could tear the fear out through skin. Catherine tried to hold her, but Emma fought like a trapped animal, screaming, "The plane is falling! Daddy, the plane!" The on-call psychiatrist was 30 minutes away in traffic. Catherine tried techniques the therapists had taught. Count to 10, breathe deeply, ground yourself in the present. But nothing worked. Emma couldn't hear her, couldn't see her, was lost in a memory of the moment her world ended, reliving it with the vividness of trauma that never faded. Then Michael appeared in the doorway, soaked from rain, still in his work clothes. He'd been leaving when the storm started, had known what it would do to Emma, and run back. Didn't ask permission, just sat on the floor next to her and started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. His voice was steady as stone, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Emma's eyes found his through her panic, desperate for an anchor. Breathe in for 4 counts, Emma. Listen to my voice. 1, 2, 3, 4. He matched his breathing to the counts, exaggerating the inhales and exhales so she could see his chest rise and fall. Slowly, impossibly, Emma's breathing began to match his rhythm. He started humming the lullaby from that first day, Sarah's song, the melody carrying them both through the storm. Catherine knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face, and placed her hand over Emma's. The 3 of them stayed there on the floor as the storm raged outside, Michael's voice steady as a lighthouse, Emma's panic gradually subsiding, Catherine's walls finally crumbling. When Emma finally fell asleep, exhausted and hollowed out, Michael carried her to bed. Catherine followed, watching him tuck her daughter in with practiced gentleness born from 7 years of solo parenting. In the doorway of Emma's room, Catherine whispered, "How did you know to do that?" "My wife used to have panic attacks during the difficult pregnancy. I learned." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Fear is just energy with nowhere to go. You have to give it a path." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Not as an employee, not as a convenient solution to her problem, but as a person who understood pain and chose kindness anyway. The conversation happened late that night, after Emma was deeply asleep and the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. Catherine poured 2 glasses of whiskey, expensive stuff she usually saved for closing deals, and handed one to Michael. They sat in her office, the city spread below them like scattered diamonds, 2 people who'd become accidental allies. My husband was on a business trip to London. Private jet. They said it was mechanical failure. Catherine stared into her glass, the amber liquid catching lamplight. I've read the reports 100 times, trying to find someone to blame. There was no one. Just bad luck and worse weather. She took a long sip, the whiskey burning down her throat. Robert was the dreamer. I was the operator. He'd have these wild ideas about charity initiatives and sustainable investing, and I'd figure out how to make them profitable. We were a good team. Her voice dropped. And then one morning I got a call. Suddenly I was alone with the 4-year-old who watched her father leave and never saw him come back. Emma used to be so bright, curious about everything. After the crash, it was like someone turned off a light inside her, and I didn't know how to turn it back on. She met Michael's eyes across the space between them. I'm good at business, at strategy, at making hard decisions, but I couldn't save my own daughter from her grief. Michael was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain that had been worn smooth by years. My wife was a singer. Sarah. She had this voice that could make you cry even when she was singing about grocery lists. We met at a studio session. I was mixing her demo. She sang a song she'd written about hope, and I fell in love right there behind the soundboard. He smiled at the memory, something genuine breaking through the exhaustion. When she got pregnant, we were terrified and thrilled. But her blood pressure kept spiking. The doctors said bed rest, said it would be fine. The smile faded. It wasn't fine. She hemorrhaged during delivery. They had to choose, her or the baby. She made the choice before they could ask me. Left a note with the nurse. Save our daughter. Her name is Grace. Tell her I'm in every song she'll ever hear. His hands tightened around the glass. For the first year, I was just surviving. Bottles and diapers and this screaming infant who needed so much. I had nothing left to give. I hated the world, hated Sarah for leaving me, hated myself for being angry at her. He looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes. But Grace kept growing, kept changing. One day she smiled at me, really smiled, and I understood. Sarah's last gift wasn't just our daughter. It was the choice to keep loving, even when it hurts. Catherine's tears fell openly now, salt tracks down carefully made-up cheeks. I don't know how to do that. I shut down after Robert died. Threw myself into work because numbers don't leave you. Markets don't crash in planes. I thought I was protecting Emma by being strong, but I was just hiding. You're not hiding anymore. Michael's voice was gentle. You're here. You asked for help. That's not weakness. That's love. The words hung between them, profound in their simplicity. Catherine realized she hadn't talked about Robert. Really talked. Not the sanitized version she gave journalists since the funeral. This janitor with kind eyes and calloused hands had given her something she didn't know she needed. Permission to be human again. The silence stretched, comfortable and uncomfortable at once. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, two people sat with their grief between them like a third presence, acknowledged and bearable because shared. Michael stood first, setting down his empty glass. It's late. Grace is with a neighbor. I should go. Catherine stood too, the moment ending but something having shifted between them that neither could name yet. Thank you. For tonight. For Emma. For this. At the door, Michael turned back. Catherine, Miss Sterling, I mean. He fumbled, having used her first name accidentally, the intimacy of the conversation making formal address feel wrong. Catherine is fine. When we're like this. He nodded and left quickly, both of them aware that something had begun that they didn't have words for yet. Catherine stood alone in her office, touching the window where his reflection had been moments before, whispered to the glass. What am I doing? Across the city, Michael sat in a cab with his head in his hands, thinking the same thing. But the next morning, Richard Harrison reviewed the security logs and noted that Michael Brooks had arrived at the executive level at 7:50 p.m. and left at 11:30, made a note in a file he was building, smiled slowly to himself. Interesting. 2 months dissolved into a pattern that felt inevitable, like water finding its level. Michael arrived at the penthouse at 5:30 each evening, Emma waiting by the window, watching for him. Grace visited twice weekly, the girls inseparable within minutes, building elaborate games that spanned days. Catherine found herself extending business dinners to get home earlier, declining invitations that would keep her away past 8 when Michael typically left. The transformation in Emma was undeniable. Full sentences became paragraphs. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then genuine. Piano practice shifted from obligation to joy. But Catherine noticed other changes too. The way she watched Michael's hands demonstrate guitar chords, how her breath caught when he smiled, the hyper-awareness of his presence that had nothing to do with gratitude. Michael still worked his janitor shift, 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., arriving at the penthouse exhausted, but never showing it to Emma. Catherine had offered 3 times to create a formal position with benefits, eliminate the pretense of him mopping floors he was overqualified to clean. Each time, he refused. "I'm not going to be a kept man. I work for my living." The pride in his voice was steel wrapped in velvet, immovable. Catherine recognized it because she carried the same pride, just expressed differently. They were both people who'd built identities on not needing rescue. The office gossip had intensified from whispers to open speculation. Michael's car appeared in the security logs every evening. People noticed the CEO leaving earlier, smiling more, the Ice Queen thawing in ways that made long-time employees exchange significant glances. Margaret from HR submitted another memo about documentation and proper procedures. Richard Harrison collected evidence like a prosecutor building a case. Catherine ignored them all with the blunt force of her authority, but the pressure built like steam in a sealed container. She couldn't sleep one December night, her mind refusing to quiet. At 2 a.m., she opened her laptop and typed Michael's name into Google, telling herself it was due diligence, knowing it was something else. The search results hit her like cold water. YouTube video from 8 years ago. Michael at a Grammy Awards after-party, standing with artists whose albums went platinum. Articles from industry magazines. The sound genius behind the hits. Interview clips where young Michael talked about music with the passion other people reserved for religion. His hands moved as he spoke, shaping sound in the air, explaining how he captured the space between notes where emotion lived. She found their engagement announcement. Michael Brooks and Sarah Chen, her face luminous with joy. Wedding photos on a blog that hadn't been updated in 7 years. Intimate ceremony, both in jeans, guitar and microphone as centerpieces. The last professional mention. Diamond Sound Studios parts ways with Michael Brooks. No explanation, just silence where a career had been. Catherine pieced together what the gaps meant. He'd walked away from Grammy nominations and 6-figure contracts right when Sarah would have gotten sick. Sacrificed everything at the moment most people were reaching their peak. She thought about her own choices, the clients she'd prioritized over Emma's bedtime, the deals closed while missing school events, the empire built on absences. The comparison cut deep enough to draw blood. The next evening, when Michael arrived, Catherine couldn't contain herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael set down the guitar case, wariness entering his expression. "Tell you what?" "That you were famous. That you gave up a Grammy-level career." His face went carefully blank, the kind of blank that meant fury held under tight control. Did you investigate me?" "I Googled you. Public information." "No." His voice was quiet, but hard as diamond. "You dug into my life. This is exactly what I was afraid of." "Afraid of what?" "Being treated like a charity case. Like you need to fix me along with your daughter. I don't need saving, Miss Sterling." The formal address stung more than the anger. Catherine's own temper rose to meet his. "I was trying to understand you. You know everything about me, my husband, my failures as a mother. I know nothing about you except what you choose to share." "That's called boundaries. You don't get to buy access to my past because you're curious." "I wasn't buying anything. God, is that what you think of me? That I commodify everything?" Michael's jaw worked, honesty fighting with restraint. "Don't you?" You tried to triple my salary first day, tried to create a position for me. You solve problems with money because that's the only tool you trust. The accuracy of it landed like a punch. Catherine struck back on instinct. And you solve them with judgment. You walk around here thinking you're morally superior because you're poor and I'm rich. You decided I was a bad mother before you even knew me. The words hung between them, both breathing hard, both recognizing they'd hit truths that couldn't be unsaid. Michael's voice dropped, losing its edge. You're right. I did judge you. I saw the suits and the money and assumed you didn't care about Emma. I was wrong. Catherine felt her anger deflate, leaving exhaustion in its wake. And I do try to control things with money. It's what I'm good at. How I feel less helpless. I'm sorry I invaded your privacy. The silence stretched. Michael moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. I left the industry because Sarah needed me. After she died, I couldn't. Music was ours. Playing it felt like moving on without her. Like betrayal. But you played for Emma. Because Emma needed it more than my grief needed protecting. Catherine crossed the room slowly, standing beside him at the window. Their reflections ghosted in the glass, two people trying to bridge a gap wider than money or class. I envy you. The choice you made. I've spent Emma's whole life choosing work over her, telling myself I was building her future, but really I was avoiding being present in her present. You're present now. That counts. Their eyes met in the reflection, held longer than professional distance allowed. Both looked away simultaneously, the moment too charged to sustain. I should check on the girls. Michael left the room quickly, and Catherine stood alone, wondering when concern had become something more complicated, more dangerous. Week 14 brought the Christmas shopping trip. Emma insisted both Catherine and Michael come to FAO Schwartz to help choose Grace's gift. The first time the three of them ventured into public together beyond the building's controlled environment. The toy store glittered with seasonal excess, children's voices echoing off high ceilings. Emma pulled them both through aisles, chattering about what Grace might like. Michael and Catherine followed, maintaining careful distance that felt more obvious than touching would have. At the stuffed animal section, Emma pointed to a plush monarch butterfly. Michael and Catherine reached for it simultaneously, their hands colliding, fingers overlapping for 3 seconds too long. The sales clerk smiled at them. Your daughter has wonderful taste. Neither corrected the assumption. In the silence after, the lie of omission felt heavier than truth. Catherine bought the toy despite Michael's protest, watching his pride war with practicality. Outside, over hot chocolate at a cafe, while the girls sat at another table giggling, Michael's frustration surfaced. I'm not comfortable with this. You buying things, us pretending to be... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Pretending to be what? A family. Or something. Catherine's chest tightened around words she couldn't say. Would it be so terrible if we were? Michael looked at her with something raw and unguarded in his expression. Yes, because I'm a janitor, and you're a billionaire, and when this ends, Emma and Grace lose each other. I won't let Grace be hurt because I couldn't keep perspective. What makes you so sure it would end? Because fairy tales aren't real, Catherine. The use of her first name softened the cynicism, made it sound like regret instead of dismissal. Week 15 brought Michelle Davis, the new executive assistant. 28, efficient, beautiful in the way that made heads turn. She brought Michael coffee one evening when she saw him arriving, touching his arm while she laughed too loud at his polite responses. Catherine watched from her office, irrational jealousy burning in her chest like acid. Later, she snapped at Michelle over a minor scheduling issue, her voice cold enough to frost glass. "Your job is assisting me, not socializing with visitors." Michelle looked confused and wounded. Catherine dismissed her, then sat at her desk, recognizing the truth. She was jealous of a 28-year-old flirting with a man who wasn't hers, had never been hers, couldn't be hers. Week 16 arrived with Grace's dental emergency. Michael took a call in the hallway, his voice tight with stress Catherine recognized from her own financial calculations. "I know the specialist costs more. Just schedule the appointment. I'll figure it out." Catherine had overheard enough to understand. Later, when Michael returned, she tried to help. "I couldn't help hearing. Let me help with Grace's dental work. Call it a bonus, or—" "No, absolutely not." The refusal was sharp enough to cut. "Michael, this is your daughter's health, which makes it my responsibility, not yours. I've been handling Grace's life for 7 years without rescue. This isn't about pride, it is about pride. It's all I have left. Please don't take that too." He walked away before she could argue further. Catherine stood in the empty hallway, feeling the distance between their worlds like a physical barrier. Later, she donated anonymously to a charity providing pediatric dental care, ensured Grace qualified for their program. When Michael told her days later that Grace's treatment was covered, Catherine smiled and said nothing, a small kindness she could offer without wounding his pride. The New Year's Eve Gala was Sterling Enterprises' annual tradition, started by Robert to raise funds for arts education in public schools. Catherine attended because it was expected, wearing a silver gown that cost more than Michael made in 6 months. Emma begged to perform, had been practicing a piano piece for weeks. Catherine agreed without knowing Michael would be involved. Grace had visited Michael the week before with a request impossible to refuse. "Daddy, Emma needs you for her performance. Please come back." He'd been staying distant after their argument about money, protecting them both from complications he saw forming. But Grace's earnestness broke through his defenses. "Your mom, Catherine, she's been through enough because of me." "But you love her. And she loves you. I heard her tell Aunt Rebecca on the phone." Michael's heart stopped. Grace wasn't supposed to have heard that conversation. Catherine's voice, raw and honest in a way she never was at work. "Emma needs you, Daddy. And I think Miss Catherine does too." One last time, he told himself. For Emma. Then he'd step back if that's what Catherine needed. The concert hall at Lincoln Center glittered with Manhattan's elite, the same people who'd whispered about scandal while writing checks for charity. Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her smile never reaching her eyes. Richard Harrison watched from across the room with a date young enough to be his daughter, his expression predatory. The children's showcase began, young musicians displaying the fruits of the program Sterling Enterprises funded. Catherine was preparing to leave when the announcement came. Next, Emma Sterling, age 7, performing an original composition. Catherine's head snapped up. Emma hadn't told her she was performing, hadn't mentioned original composition. Her daughter walked to the piano, terrified but determined, and spoke into the microphone. "This is called Where Love Still Lives. My friend's daddy taught me. It was his wife's favorite song." Catherine's breath caught. Sarah's song. The one Michael had hummed that first day in the break room. Emma's fingers touched the keys, the melody simple and haunting, clearly the work of someone who'd written from grief transformed into hope. She made mistakes, hesitated, fear visible in the set of her small shoulders. Then guitar joined from backstage, the chords supporting and strengthening. Michael walked out with the instruments Sarah had loved, offering Emma what he'd offered Catherine: presence without demands, support without control. The audience gasped, recognizing the scandal made flesh, but Michael's eyes found only Emma. Under his steady presence, she grew confident, found her rhythm. The music swelled with a beauty that transcended technique, the raw honesty of a child processing loss through art. Catherine's tears fell unchecked as Michael shared the most precious piece of his grief to help her daughter heal. When the last note faded, silence held for one perfect moment before applause erupted. Catherine was already moving, walking down the aisle toward the stage while society watched. She didn't care about protocol or appearances or what the board would say tomorrow. Emma ran to her arms. Michael stood with his guitar, expression unguarded for the first time, showing everything he'd held back. "Don't go." The microphone caught her words, broadcast them to the entire room. Michael's jaw tightened. "Catherine, don't leave us. I don't care what people think. I don't care about the company or my reputation or any of it. You taught me how to be human again. Emma needs you." Her voice broke on the admission of her own need, the words she couldn't quite say in front of hundreds of witnesses. Michael set down the guitar, crossed to her, aware of every eye watching, every phone recording. "Are you sure? Once this moment is public, there's no taking it back. The scandal gets worse. The pressure increases." Catherine cut him off. "I'm resigning. In 6 months. Already decided. I'm starting Robert's Foundation. Real this time. For kids who lost parents. Life's too short to spend in boardrooms when I could be making real difference." Michael stared at her, this woman who'd just thrown away everything she'd built, and felt his own walls crumbling. "I choose this. I choose us. If you'll have me." But Michael pulled back physically, putting space between them, even as something in his chest cracked open. "Now I leave, before this gets worse. Emma needs a stable mother more than she needs me complicating your life." He walked off the stage, leaving Catherine alone as midnight approached and the year turned over. She stood frozen, the applause dying, aware she'd just declared herself publicly and been rejected in front of everyone who mattered. Emma clung to her legs. Grace ran from backstage to join them, 2 little girls trying to hold together what adults were breaking. Catherine lifted her daughter, feeling the weight of her choice, and left through the side exit while cameras flashed, and Richard Harrison smiled like a man who'd just won a war he'd been fighting in shadows. Michael didn't come to the penthouse the next evening, or the one after. He texted Catherine a message that felt like goodbye wrapped in kindness. "Need time. Still here for Emma if she needs me, but stepping back from daily visits." Emma asked for him every day, her confusion bleeding into regression, not as severe as before Michael, but the light had dimmed. Catherine respected his space while dying inside, knowing she'd pushed too hard, too fast, too publicly. 10 days later, the photograph appeared. A tabloid had captured them at the gala, Michael and Catherine on the dance floor, faces inches apart, his hand at her waist, her eyes closed like a woman in prayer. The caption dripped innuendo: "Grieving widow finds comfort in building janitor's arms." The story was fabrication built on fragments of truth. Anonymous sources claimed the affair had been ongoing for months, that Emma was being used as cover, that employees had reported inappropriate conduct. The photograph went viral, shared across social media with commentary ranging from romantic to vicious. Catherine's phone exploded with calls from board members, investors, PR consultants preparing for damage control. The company's stock dipped 3% on speculation about her stability. Major news outlets picked up the story, giving it legitimacy through repetition. Michael became a target. Reporters showing up at his apartment building, photographers following him to Grace's school, colleagues who'd ignored him suddenly having opinions about his character and intentions. The worst came from within Sterling Enterprises. Richard Harrison called an emergency board meeting, his presentation surgical in its precision. Charts showing Catherine's distraction, the Tokyo merger delay, missed quarterly reviews, decisions made without proper consultation. He never mentioned Michael by name, just painted a picture of a CEO whose personal grief was compromising professional judgment. "I'm suggesting we lighten her load. Take over some responsibilities, temporarily, for the good of the company and for Catherine herself." 3 board members sided with him immediately. The CFO, David Mitchell, wavered under pressure. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Michael made his decision in a parking lot in Queens, sitting in his car after dropping Grace at his sister Rebecca's farm upstate. He couldn't let Catherine lose everything because of him. Couldn't watch her daughter regress, his daughter harassed, both their lives destroyed by a connection that society refused to allow. He wrote a letter to Emma, explaining that some people were scared of things they didn't understand, that she was stronger than she knew, that sometimes the bravest thing was letting go. Then he drove to Catherine's office at midnight when he knew she'd still be there, working because work was how she handled pain. She looked up when he entered, hope and fear warring in her expression. "I'm leaving. Tonight. Taking Grace to my sister's place for a while." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "Running proves their narrative, Michael. Staying destroys yours. You have to choose the company or whatever this is between us. And you should choose the company. Emma needs a stable mother more than she needs me." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, the letter for Emma. "I wrote this for her. Explains I'm not abandoning her, that she's stronger than fear." He set it on her desk, the paper a white flag of surrender. "Catherine, I'm not in your world. I never was. You need to choose your empire or me, and you should choose the empire." "What if I don't want to choose? What if I want both?" Michael's expression held such tenderness it hurt to witness. "Then you're braver than I am, because I can't watch you lose everything. I can't be the reason Emma loses her mother to scandal. I won't gamble with my daughter's future for my feelings." Catherine stood, came around the desk, close enough to touch, but not touching. "What about my feelings? Don't I get a say?" "Don't." His voice broke on the word. "Please don't make this harder. I'm in love with you too. There. It's said. Now what?" Michael closed his eyes like the words were knives finding gaps in armor he'd tried so hard to maintain. When he opened them, his decision was written in the set of his jaw. "Now I leave, before we both make choices we can't take back. Before this destroys everything you've built. Before our daughters pay for what we want." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "I'm not running. I'm protecting everyone, including you." Then he was gone, leaving Catherine alone in her office overlooking a city that suddenly felt empty despite 8 million people breathing the same air. She picked up the envelope, felt the weight of his goodbye, and understood that loving someone sometimes meant letting them make choices that broke your heart. 6 weeks passed like a wound that wouldn't close, each day bleeding into the next with a particular ache of separation chosen for protection rather than indifference. Michael worked construction on his brother-in-law's crew upstate, framing houses in February wind that bit through work gloves and canvas jackets. $15 an hour cash, paid at week's end, enough to contribute to Rebecca's household and buy Grace's school supplies, but not enough to rebuild the life he'd left behind in Queens. His hands remembered different work, mixing boards and frequency curves, not nail guns and 2x4s. The muscle memory of creation versus the repetitive labor of construction. At night, his fingers ached from hammer strikes and cold, a different pain than the cramping he'd gotten from long studio sessions, but pain nonetheless. Grace adjusted with the resilience children carry like invisible armor, making friends with her cousins, charming Rebecca's neighbors, excelling in the small-town school where being new made her interesting, rather than suspect. But every morning she asked the same question. "When are we going home, Daddy?" Michael had stopped promising soon because he didn't know if home existed anymore, or if he'd destroyed it by running. The apartment in Queens was gone, lease broken, furniture in Rebecca's storage barn. His old life dismantled in the service of protecting Catherine from himself, from the scandal his presence generated, from having to choose between empire and janitor. Rebecca found him on her porch after Grace went to bed, the third consecutive night he'd pulled a beer from the garage refrigerator and stared at fields gone dark under winter constellations. She sat without invitation, 41 years old and carrying the particular wisdom of people who'd survived their own catastrophes and came out wiser rather than bitter. "You're spiraling." "I'm managing." 3 beers on a Tuesday while staring at nothing isn't managing. It's avoiding. Michael took another pull from the bottle, the beer gone warm in his hands, but drinking it was something to do besides think. "She needs to fight for her company, not for me. Emma needs a mother who isn't drowning in scandal I created. Emma needs a mother who's happy. You both deserve that much. And from what Grace tells me about their video chats, Emma's regressing without you." The knowledge sat heavy in Michael's chest. He'd written letters, 2 so far, trying to explain to a 7-year-old why adults made promises they couldn't keep, why sometimes love meant leaving, why the world was complicated in ways that defied the simple logic of a child's heart. The letters felt inadequate even as he mailed them. Rebecca pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. "My ex-husband left when the kids were young. Came back a year later begging forgiveness. You know what changed my mind? Not his words, his actions. He'd gotten therapy, joined AA, actually addressed the things that made him run. Showed me changed behavior, not promised change. I didn't run because I'm broken. I ran to protect her." "You ran because you were scared. Of the scandal, of not being enough, of her choosing her empire over you. So you made the choice for her. Took away her agency in the name of protection." The accuracy of it stung worse than the cold. Michael stared at distant lights from neighboring farms, processing truth he'd been avoiding. What if I go back and she's moved on? Built walls I can't get through. Then at least you tried. But Michael, from what Grace says, Catherine's not moving on. She's fighting for the company, for Emma, for the foundation she's planning. Maybe she's fighting for you too, and you're just not there to see it. Michael finished his beer in silence, Rebecca's words settling into the space where certainty used to live. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered through Catherine's assistant with the careful formality of someone trying not to intrude. Emma read it, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the paper creased from multiple foldings, ink slightly smeared where Michael's hand had dragged across words before they dried. She read it once, then twice, then carried it to Catherine's home office where her mother reviewed depositions for the shareholder lawsuit that opportunistic attorneys had filed,
sensing blood in water. Catherine looked up from legal documents dense with accusations and saw her daughter holding that envelope like it contained the secrets of the universe. Why did Mr.
Brooks leave? Catherine removed her reading glasses, buying time to formulate an answer that was true without being crushing.
Because people were saying cruel things. He thought leaving would make my life easier.
But he promised he'd stay. He told me he wasn't going anywhere. The betrayal in Emma's voice cut deep. Catherine had no defense that wouldn't compound the wound, so she tried a different truth.
Sometimes adults make promises intending to keep them. Then circumstances change in ways they didn't anticipate. It doesn't mean the promise was a lie. Emma's expression hardened with an anger Catherine recognized from mirrors, from board meetings where someone tried to manipulate her with careful language. That's what grown-ups say when they mean they changed their mind. He changed his mind about us. The simplicity of that accusation landed like a stone.
Catherine pulled Emma into her lap, this 7-year-old who'd learned too young that the world took people without warning, and that promises were fragile things easily broken by fear.
He left because staying made my life complicated. People were saying terrible things about both of us. He thought leaving would protect us from scandal. That's stupid. We're supposed to protect each other. That's what families do. Out of the mouths of children came the wisdom adults spent years forgetting through compromise and calculation. Catherine held her daughter closer, breathing in the shampoo-clean smell of her hair, feeling the weight of every choice that had led them here. You're right. It is stupid. And I'm going to fix it. The words felt like a promise and a commitment and a declaration of war against fear all at once. The board meeting was scheduled for Valentine's Day, an irony that escaped no one in the room.
7 members arranged themselves around the mahogany table that had witnessed countless decisions affecting billions in capital and thousands of lives. Richard Harrison had spent 6 weeks building his coalition, 5 votes secured through a combination of genuine concern and calculated opportunism. Catherine arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her sharpest navy suit. Armani, $8,000. Armor for a battle where appearance mattered as much as substance. She'd spent the previous night rehearsing not the defense her lawyers prepared, but something rawer, more honest, the kind of truth that couldn't be rehearsed. Richard presented first, his slides professionally designed by consultants who charged 5 figures for PowerPoint decks. Charts showing Catherine's distraction in quarters following Robert's death. Metrics dipping during periods when she'd prioritized family crises over quarterly reviews. Testimony from executives who'd noted her emotional volatility. The unprecedented decision to allow non-qualified personnel access to her minor child. He never mentioned Michael by name, just painted implications in broad strokes. A CEO compromised by grief. A leader whose personal entanglements affected professional judgment. A woman who needed support and rest, not condemnation, which made his proposal sound generous rather than predatory. I recommend a 6-month leave of absence. Catherine retains her board position, her equity, her voice in major decisions. I serve as interim CEO. We stabilize the company while allowing our colleague to heal from trauma that would break anyone. 3 heads nodded immediately. Board members who'd never fully accepted a woman in the CEO role, who'd voted for her after Robert's death because the alternative was outside hiring, but had always viewed her tenure as temporary. David Mitchell, the CFO and Catherine's ally for 6 years, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. His silence was its own betrayal. Catherine's turn came with her career balanced on the edge of a decision already half made. She stood without notes, abandoning the prepared defense her attorneys had crafted over billable hours, speaking instead from the place Michael had taught her to access. I've led this company through my husband's death, a pandemic that shut down global markets, 2 corrections that wiped out competitors. Revenues up 28% under my tenure. Customer retention 94%, highest in our sector. Employee satisfaction at record levels despite industry-wide turnover. She met each board member's eyes in turn, holding their gaze until they looked away. Richard presents metrics showing distraction. I present metrics showing results. You want to remove me not because I failed this company, but because of whom I spent time with. Not performance failures, not fiduciary breaches, personal judgment about my private relationships. Her voice dropped into the register she used when negotiations reached their final stage. If this board votes based on my personal life rather than professional merit, you're not protecting the company. You're protecting outdated ideas about class and propriety that have nothing to do with our bottom line or shareholder value. Richard interjected smoothly, his tone conciliatory, but his words sharp. No one questions your past performance, Catherine. We question your current capacity, given ongoing personal stress that's become public scandal. The tabloid coverage, the social media commentary, the shareholder lawsuit, these aren't theoretical concerns. They're affecting our stock price and client relationships. The Texas investment firm that dropped us did so because the lead partner is Richard's golf buddy and saw an opportunity to curry favor. The stock dip recovered within a week. The lawsuit is frivolous ambulance chasing that our attorneys will dismiss on summary judgment. Catherine pulled out her phone, projected her screen onto the boardroom display without asking permission. Emails from clients expressing support, internal surveys showing employee morale unchanged, contracts signed in the past month totaling $120 million in new revenue. I've continued performing at the highest level while managing personal challenges. That's not weakness. That's exactly the resilience this company needs in leadership. The vote proceeded with parliamentary efficiency designed to disguise brutality. 4-3. Catherine retained her position by a margin thin as razor wire. But victory came with conditions that felt like defeat. Monthly board reviews instead of quarterly. Ethics oversight committee with veto power over certain decisions. Mandatory disclosure of any personal relationships that might affect judgment. She'd won the battle and lost autonomy. Kept her title while having her authority neutered by men who couldn't forgive her for being human while female, for needing help while powerful, for loving someone their prejudices said she shouldn't. Richard smiled graciously in defeat, already calculating his next move. David Mitchell couldn't meet her eyes when the meeting adjourned. Catherine returned to her office and closed the door, leaning against it in the silence of her glass tower, and understood that winning this fight meant losing something more important than a corporate title. She sat at her desk and opened a new document, typed 8 words. Letter of Resignation, Catherine Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. Stared at them for 10 minutes while Manhattan glittered below, indifferent to one woman's crisis of priority and purpose. Then she started writing. The resignation would be effective in 6 months, enough time to transition leadership and protect the company she'd built from the chaos of sudden departure. Not Richard, the board would hire from outside, someone without the baggage of internal politics and failed coups. But not her either. Not anymore. She spent the next 2 weeks researching foundations for grieving children, programs that helped kids process trauma through art and music and community. Robert had dreamed of this before the Atlantic took him, had talked late at night about using their wealth for something more meaningful than quarterly earnings. Catherine would build it in his memory and Sarah's, for Emma and Grace, and all the children who'd learned too young that love didn't guarantee permanence. The decision felt like shedding skin she'd outgrown, painful in the way growth always was, liberating in ways she hadn't anticipated. She told no one yet, not the board, not her attorneys, not even Emma. Just researched and planned, and felt something like hope beginning to displace the emptiness that had lived in her chest since Robert died. The Children's Arts Gala invitation arrived with the weight of obligation and the ghost of better times. Annual event, Lincoln Center, raising funds for public school music programs. Catherine had hosted for 8 years, first alongside Robert, then alone after the crash. Declining would generate questions and speculation. Attending meant facing society's judgment in person rather than through tabloid filters. She almost didn't go. Then Emma mentioned wanting to perform, having registered 3 weeks prior through the program director, forging Catherine's signature on the permission form with the practiced hand of a child who'd learned to navigate adult systems through necessity. You registered to perform? When were you planning to tell me? I'm telling you now. Grace and I wrote a song. We want to share it. The partnership between the girls had survived Michael's departure through video chats and determination, Grace upstate and Emma in Manhattan, but refusing to let geography sever what they'd built. Catherine should have been monitoring those calls more closely, should have known they were planning something, but grief and board fights and lawsuit depositions had consumed attention she used to reserve for her daughter. What's the song about? About finding family when you're not looking? About love being stronger than rules people make up about who belongs with who? About being brave enough to choose what matters. The lyrics, clearly written with adult guidance, Michael's guidance, were less children's composition than manifesto. Catherine recognized the message aimed at her, the 7-year-old's attempt to push her mother toward courage that felt increasingly impossible. I'll be there, I promise. She kept that promise 3 weeks later, wearing burgundy instead of her usual black, a small rebellion no one would notice, but that felt significant. Lincoln Center glittered with Manhattan's elite, smaller crowd than previous years, some donors declining with transparent excuses about schedule conflicts. The price of scandal measured in empty seats and withdrawn checks. Richard Harrison attended with a date young enough to make Catherine wonder if he'd learned nothing from observing her destruction, or perhaps had learned exactly the wrong lessons. He watched her with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd won without having to fire the final shot, content to let scandal do his work while maintaining plausible deniability. The children's showcase began with a violin prodigy from the Bronx, followed by a jazz ensemble from Harlem who played with the unselfconscious joy that money couldn't teach. Catherine prepared to leave after fulfilling her hosting obligations, her presence documented by photographers who'd capture her attendance without scandal for the first time in months. Then the program director approached, concern creasing her professionally pleasant expression. Ms. Sterling, your daughter is our closing performer. I assumed you knew? Catherine's heart kicked against her ribs like something caged, trying to escape. Emma's performing tonight? She registered weeks ago, listed you as guardian approval. Before Catherine could process the implications, the announcement came through speakers designed to fill every corner of the concert hall. Our final performer, Emma Sterling, age 7, presenting an original composition. Catherine's daughter walked onto the stage wearing the navy dress from that first terrible therapy session, altered now to fit her growing frame, transformed from symbol of struggle to declaration of progress. Emma sat at the piano, hands trembling slightly, and spoke into the microphone with a voice that carried despite its softness. This is called Where Love Still Lives. My friend's daddy taught me. It was his wife's favorite song. She died giving birth so my friend could be born. The song is about how sometimes people leave, but the love doesn't. It just finds new places to live, new people to hold it. Catherine's vision blurred. Emma's fingers found the keys. The melody Michael had hummed that first day in the janitor's break room transformed through months of practice and a child's interpretation into something that carried both heartbreak and hope. She played with small mistakes and hesitations, the imperfection making it more honest than any polished performance could achieve. Then guitar joined from the wings, chords wrapping around Emma's melody like arms around a frightened child. Michael walked onto the stage, carrying the instrument Sarah had loved, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that weren't quite right for Lincoln Center, but were clearly the best he owned. His eyes found Emma first, steadying her with his presence, then drifted to Catherine in the third row. Everything he'd held back showed in that glance. Loneliness and love and fear that had driven him away, and courage that brought him back. Emma's playing grew stronger with his support, finding confidence she'd lacked alone. The music swelled beyond technical proficiency into raw emotional honesty that commanded attention through vulnerability rather than polish. Then Emma sang, her voice high and clear over piano and guitar, words she must have written with Michael's help because they carried his philosophy transformed through a child's hope. When the sky turns dark and the world feels cold, there's a light that stays, a hand to hold. In the space between the notes we play, love still lives. It finds a way. Through the grief and through the years, through the silence and the tears, what we build is what remains. Love still lives beyond the pain. The song built to a crescendo that shouldn't have worked structurally, but succeeded emotionally, then resolved into gentle resolution that felt like peace after storm. The last note faded into silence that held for 3 perfect seconds, the audience collectively holding breath, before applause erupted with a particular intensity of genuine emotion rather than polite obligation. Catherine was already moving, abandoning her seat and walking down the aisle while society watched and camera phones recorded. She didn't care about protocol or appearances or what Richard Harrison would say to board members tomorrow. Emma saw her coming, finished her bow, and ran into Catherine's arms with the force of a child who'd been holding too much inside for too long. Michael stood stage left with his guitar, expression completely unguarded for the first time since that night in Catherine's office when he'd chosen protection over presence. His face showed everything now, the weeks of missing them, the fear that he'd stayed away too long, the hope that maybe courage wasn't too late. Catherine spoke before thinking, before fear could reclaim control, the words catching the microphone Emma had left on and broadcasting to every corner of the concert hall. "Don't go. Not again." Michael's throat worked, swallowing words that wouldn't come. Catherine shifted Emma to her hip and walked toward him, closing the distance between them with steps that felt like crossing continents. "Don't leave us again. I don't care what people think. I don't care about the company or the board or any of it." Her voice carried to the balconies, to the cameras, to Richard Harrison, whose expression shifted from satisfaction to concern as he recognized the narrative escaping his control. "You taught me that showing up matters more than status, that presence is worth more than any empire. Emma needs you. I need you. Please stay." Michael set his guitar down with careful precision, buying seconds to process what she was asking in front of hundreds of witnesses and countless more who'd see this on social media within the hour. He crossed to her, stopping close enough to touch but not touching, hyper-aware of every eye watching, every phone recording. "Are you sure? Catherine, once this moment is public, there's no walking it back. The scandal intensifies, the pressure increases. Your board just gave you conditions." She cut him off with truth she'd been rehearsing in empty offices and sleepless nights. "I'm resigning. 6 months.
Already drafted the letter. I'm starting Robert's Foundation for real this time. For kids who lost parents too young. Emma inspired it. You inspired it. And I'm done choosing empire over family. Michael stared at her. This woman who'd just chosen him over everything she'd built, and felt the walls he'd constructed for protection crumble into dust. I'm terrified. I have no job, no apartment, $200 in savings, and debt from Grace's dental work. I'm not bringing financial security or social status or anything except... Catherine kissed him, cutting off the litany of insufficiency with lips against his, uncaring that 1,000 people watched and recorded and judged. When she pulled back, her voice was fierce. I don't want financial security from you. I want you to teach our daughters that love matters more than money, that character matters more than status, that being present is worth more than being powerful. Our daughters. You said our daughters. They've been ours since the break room. We were just too scared to admit it. Michael pulled her close with one arm, the other reaching for Emma, the three of them forming a unit on the stage while applause built from scattered individuals to collective roar. Grace appeared from the wings where she'd been waiting with Rebecca, launching herself at the group with 7-year-old enthusiasm. 4 people on the stage, 2 broken families choosing to become something new. The applause was deafening, some genuine, moved by the raw honesty of the moment, some scandalized, witnessing the CEO publicly choosing the janitor. All of it irrelevant to the people at the center, who heard only each other. Richard Harrison left through a side exit, his careful campaign reduced to ash by a public declaration he couldn't spin. 3 board members who'd supported Catherine smiled with genuine warmth, recognizing courage where others saw scandal. The moment crystallized into permanence through cameras and social media, but the people living it noticed only each other and the choice they'd just made in full view of the world. Backstage, away from microphones and witnesses, Michael found his voice again. I meant what I said. I'm not bringing anything practical. Rebecca's letting us stay with her until I find work, but I don't know how long that'll take after being blacklisted. Grace needs stability. I can't promise... Catherine placed her fingers against his lips, stopping the spiral. We figure it out together. That's what partners do. You handle daughters and music and teaching me how to be human. I handle logistics and foundation building and unlearning corporate thinking. We combine what we're each good at. What if I'm not good enough? What if the girls need more than I can give? They need you to show up. Everything else is secondary. Grace's voice carried from the green room where Rebecca was supervising. Daddy, Emma wants to show me something. Can we go to the roof garden? Michael looked at Catherine, asking permission he didn't quite need but wanted because they were building something new that required different rules than the ones they'd lived by before. Go. I need to make a few calls anyway. Let the board know about my resignation before they see it on social media. You're really doing this? Leaving the company? I already left in every way that matters. The resignation just makes it official. They stood close in the narrow backstage corridor, the sounds of the gala continuing beyond the walls, their daughters' voices echoing from somewhere above. Michael traced the line of Catherine's jaw with one calloused finger, the gesture both tender and claiming. I love you, in case the public declaration didn't make it clear. It was fairly obvious, but hearing it never gets old. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than proclamation.
then went to find their daughters while Catherine pulled out her phone and composed the text that would change everything. 6 months passed like water finding its level, each day settling into patterns that felt inevitable once chosen, but it seemed impossible from the other side of fear. The foundation consumed Catherine's transition period from sterling enterprises, the work of building something from vision into functioning reality, more challenging than managing an established empire. She'd underestimated everything. The complexity of non-profit regulations and grant applications, the difficulty of hiring staff who believed in mission over salary, the skepticism from donors who wondered if this was a vanity project from a failed CEO or genuine commitment. The first 3 months brought more rejection than success, more doubt than confidence, more nights when Catherine questioned whether walking away from corporate power had been courage or foolishness. Michael worked construction through spring while interviewing for positions he was overqualified for, but that no one would hire him for because scandal clung like smoke. The blacklist was real and comprehensive, industry whispers spreading faster than corrections. He contributed what he could financially, his pride chafing against Catherine's practical insistence that they pool resources, that marriage meant sharing burdens, not tracking who owed what. They married in April at City Hall, paperwork and promises witnessed by Grace and Emma and Rebecca, who cried happy tears. No registry, no reception, just dinner at a Brooklyn restaurant where the pasta was homemade and the staff didn't care about social position or tabloid history. Small because intimate mattered more than impressive, meaningful because chosen rather than performed for benefit of others. The foundation finally found its footing in month 5, when a New York Times feature writer did a deep dive on their programming, interviewing families whose children had been helped, documenting outcomes with the kind of rigor that separated legitimate nonprofits from tax shelters. The article ran front page of the Metro section, accompanied by photographs of Michael teaching guitar to a boy who'd lost his mother, and Catherine meeting with school administrators about program expansion. Funding followed credibility. Grants from established foundations who valued evidence over reputation. Individual donors who'd been waiting to see if commitment survived initial enthusiasm. By month 6, they employed 12 people and served 80 children across 2 boroughs, small measured against New York's needs, but significant to the families they touched. The official opening came on an August morning that smelled like late summer and possibility. The building was a brownstone in Park Slope, purchased and renovated with Catherine's capital and Michael's labor, transformed from vacant property into spaces designed for healing. Art therapy rooms with north-facing light, music studio equipped with recording technology Michael had specified down to cable length and acoustic treatment. Counseling offices staffed by therapists who'd survived their own losses and understood that grief was a country with no map. Catherine arrived at 7 because old habits died hard, wearing jeans and a foundation t-shirt instead of Armani, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, makeup minimal. She looked younger than her corporate photos, less polished, infinitely more real. Michael was already in the music studio running sound checks, his expertise finally employed in service of something that mattered rather than just paid bills. The first children arrived at 9, shy and skeptical, accompanied by parents who carried the particular exhaustion of people managing their own grief while trying to support their children's. Marcus, 8 years old, whose mother had died of cancer 6 months prior and who hadn't spoken more than necessary since. Elena, 9, whose father had been killed in a construction accident and who carried rage she didn't know how to express except through destruction. Michael gathered them in the music room, 6 kids ranging from 7 to 11, losses ranging from sudden to prolonged, but uniformly devastating. He didn't start with technique or theory, just sat with his guitar and asked a question. What does missing someone feel like? Not in words, in sounds. If your grief was music, what would it sound like? The children stared at him like he'd asked them to explain astrophysics. Marcus shook his head. That's stupid. Feelings aren't sounds. Aren't they? What sound does anger make? Elena answered immediately, her voice sharp. Loud, like drums. Good. And sadness? Quiet, like rain. Exactly. So if you miss someone, what's the sound? They thought about it. These children who'd been told to express feelings in words they didn't have, now given permission to express them in music that didn't require vocabulary. Empty. Like when a song ends and there's silence before the next one starts. Michael nodded, fingers finding chords that created space rather than filled it, notes with gaps between them that let silence speak. That's the space we're going to learn to hold, not fill, not fix. Just hold and see what grows there. Catherine watched from the doorway, this man who'd been dismissed as just a janitor teaching children what hundreds of hours of therapy hadn't reached. Her phone buzzed with a text from a major donor interested in funding expansion to the Bronx. She silenced it, choosing presence over productivity in a reversal of every instinct she'd honed across years of corporate climbing. Emma and Grace arrived after school, bursting through the door with a particular energy of 7-year-olds who'd been confined to desks all day and needed to move. They'd performed their song at the Foundation's launch fundraiser the previous week, raising $60,000 from donors who'd come skeptical and left convinced. Now they wanted to teach the other kids, to share what they'd learned about transforming grief into something that could be held and carried, rather than something that held and carried them. Can we show Marcus and Elena our song? Michael looked to Catherine, who nodded. The girls sat at the piano, Emma playing, Grace singing, and performed Where Love Still Lives for an audience of grieving children who recognized themselves in every word. When they finished, Marcus's eyes were wet, but his face had lost some of its hardness. Can I learn that? You can learn to make your own version, the melody that fits your missing. And so the teaching began, Michael guiding small fingers to chords, Catherine working with parents on resources and support, the foundation becoming what they'd envisioned, a place where grief was met with presence rather than platitudes, where children learned they weren't alone in their loss, where healing happened through community rather than isolation. As afternoon dissolved into evening and families departed with promises to return, Catherine found Michael in the music room putting away instruments. He looked tired but satisfied, the exhaustion of meaningful work rather than the depletion of labor for survival. How was it, really? Better than I hoped. Harder than I expected. Those kids have been through hell, and they're so young. But you reached them. I watched Marcus's face during the lesson. That's the first time his mom says he's shown interest in anything since the funeral. Michael wound guitar cables with the practiced efficiency of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory from a life that felt both distant and foundational. One good day doesn't mean we've fixed anything. Grief isn't a problem with a solution. It's a condition you learn to live with. I know, but you're teaching them how. That's more than anyone else has done. He crossed to her, wrapping her in arms that smelled like guitar strings and the particular sweat of physical work. They stood together in the empty studio while Brooklyn moved around them, two people who'd found each other across an impossible distance and chosen to build something meaningful from their combined brokenness. I love you. Our weird, complicated, imperfect life. It's pretty good, isn't it? It's everything I didn't know I needed. Above them, through the brownstone's old windows, Grace and Emma's laughter carried from the roof garden, where Rebecca supervised their play. Two girls who'd lost parents and found each other, who'd brought broken adults together through their need for healing, who represented the future the foundation existed to serve. Catherine thought about the board meeting where she'd defended her choices, the empire she'd walked away from, the scandal that had seemed insurmountable, until she'd chosen to walk through it rather than around it. Thought about Michael's courage in returning, in risking rejection publicly, in choosing love over the safety of distance. Thought about Robert and Sarah, whose deaths had created the grief that brought everyone together, whose memory lived in the foundation's name and work. The greatest act of courage wasn't climbing higher, she'd learned. It was being willing to meet someone exactly where they were and build something beautiful from there. Not despite the brokenness, but because of it. All the shattered pieces forming something new and stronger for having been broken and choosing to heal together. Michael's phone buzzed. Text from a music school asking if he'd be interested in teaching evening classes. His reputation slowly rebuilding through word of mouth from families whose children he'd helped. Catherine's phone showed an email from a journalist requesting an interview about the Foundation's innovative approach. Both notifications representing progress, opportunity, the slow accumulation of credibility earned through consistent showing up. But they ignored the phones, choosing instead to stand together in the studio's fading light, holding each other while their daughters played above and the foundation they'd built prepared to serve children who needed exactly what they'd found: community in grief, hope in presence, and the revolutionary understanding that love survived loss by transforming rather than ending, by finding new vessels to hold it, new hearts willing to risk breaking in service of connection. Outside, Brooklyn prepared for evening. Inside, family built from fragments prepared for tomorrow. And somewhere in the space between what was lost and what was found, love still lived, finding its way forward one choice, one day, one child at a time.